The road had always been mine, not in the legal sense of owning asphalt and faded white lines, but in the way a man can feel the earth beneath his boots and know that generations before him walked the same stretch. My grandfather carved it out with a backhoe in the late 50s, running it from the county highway down into what was then just a scatter of oaks and scrubland. He built his home at the end of it, a brick farmhouse with a red tin roof, and every turner since then had used that road like it was a birthright. When my parents passed, the land and the house fell to me, and with it, the road. For decades, that winding quarter-mile driveway was quiet. A few deer at dawn, the sound of tires crunching gravel, and once in a while, the echo of kids on bikes chasing each other under the sun. But as the years rolled on, suburbia crept closer. Fields turned into cul-de-sacs. Developers carved up the landscape into neat rows of stucco houses, identical mailboxes standing at military attention. And one day, without my say-so, the Homeowners Association of Willow Creek Estates decided my road was their road. It started small. First, a couple of SUVs parked halfway down, engines off, families unloading bags of groceries like they owned the place. Then came the joggers, earbuds in, pounding past my gate in neon sneakers. And finally, one morning, I woke up to see a bright blue, private road. HOA maintained sign bolted right into the ground at the entrance. My road. My land. I still remember the heat flushing up my neck that morning. Coffee halfway to my lips, I nearly dropped the mug. They didn't, I muttered. But they had. That was the day the war began. The HOA president's name was Gregory Miles. A man in his late 50s with too much time and too much money, who dressed like he was running for Congress. Polos tucked into khakis, Rolex flashing every time he raised his hand to make a point. He called me later that afternoon, his voice slick as oil. "Daniel," he said, "glad we could catch each other. I wanted to talk about the road situation. You see, our residents have been using it for years now, and frankly, it's just more efficient if the association takes responsibility for maintaining it. We've already sent letters out. You'll appreciate the help, I'm sure." I bit back my anger. "Greg, that's not your road. That's mine. Been in my family longer than your subdivision's been standing." He chuckled, a little puff of superiority. "I think you'll find, legally, there's a strong case for easement. People have been using it. Public good, and all that. It's in the best interest of the neighborhood. Look, I don't want to get litigious, but we'll do what we must." The line went dead. That night, I stood at the edge of the drive, staring at the blue sign gleaming in the moonlight. The anger wasn't hot anymore. It was cold, steady, a weight in my chest. They thought they could take what was mine. They thought they could bully me into submission with bylaws and threats. They had no idea who they were messing with. The first escalation came 2 weeks later. I was pulling into my driveway when I saw 3 HOA board members, clipboard in hand, measuring distances along my road. They didn't even flinch when I stopped the truck beside them. "Afternoon, Mr. Turner," one of them said, smiling that smug suburban smile. "We're just checking the right-of-way markers. Won't take long." "This isn't a right-of-way," I snapped. "This is my property. You're trespassing." "Technically," she said. "It's part of the community now. We voted." "You voted," I shot back, "on my land? Did you vote to take my house too? Or just the road?" They laughed, polite but cutting, and went back to scribbling notes. That was when I knew this wasn't just about asphalt. This was about power, about control, and they weren't going to stop. At the diner in town, I told old Earl, the sheriff, what was happening. Earl was a man who'd been around since the days when folks settled things with handshakes, not lawsuits. He scratched at his mustache and frowned. "Dan, you're in the right," he said. "But you know these HOA types. They've got money, lawyers, time. They'll drag you through court until you're gray. So I'm supposed to roll over?" He shrugged. "I'm saying pick your battles. Or find a way to make it so painful they back off." I didn't answer, but his words stuck with me. The breaking point came on a sweltering July afternoon. I came home from work to find my driveway lined with cars, minivans, sedans, SUVs, every damn one belonging to the HOA folks. They'd hosted some block party and decided my land made a fine parking lot. I could barely get my truck through. I stormed into the neighborhood to find Greg. He was in his driveway, laughing with a glass of Chardonnay, while kids played tag on the manicured lawn. "What the hell, Greg?" I demanded. "You let your people park all over my road?" He sipped his wine, calm as a snake. "Correction, Daniel. Our road. And yes, the residents are entitled to use it. That's what community means. Don't be so selfish." I saw red. "If those cars aren't gone in an hour, I'll tow every last one." His smirk was ice cold. "Go ahead. You'll be sued so fast your head spins." "Think carefully, Daniel. We're reasonable people. Play along, and this doesn't have to get ugly." I left before I did something I couldn't take back. But inside, the decision had already been made. For the next 2 weeks, I planned. I researched. I sat in the county records office, poring over maps and deeds until my eyes burned. Every dusty folder confirmed what I already knew. The road was mine. There was no easement, no loophole, no fine print. Legally, they didn't have a leg to stand on. But legal didn't matter against people like Greg. They thrived on dragging fights through the mud until you gave up. So instead of playing their game, I decided to play mine. The plan came together late one night as I sat on the porch, listening to the crickets. My eyes drifted to the line of parked HOA cars outside my gate, gleaming in the moonlight like they belonged there. That's when it hit me. They wanted my road. They'd learned what it meant to lose everything they parked on it. Not through violence, not through vandalism, but through a vanishing act so complete, they'd never forget it. I smiled in the dark, the kind of smile you don't plan. It just comes when you know you've got the upper hand. The war was no longer about words. It was about action. And I was ready. That night, I walked the length of the road slowly, my boots crunching on the gravel, the cicadas buzzing in the humid air. At every car parked there, sleek sedans, shiny SUVs, Greg's precious black BMW, I paused. I memorized them, like a general surveying the battlefield before dawn. "This road doesn't belong to you," I whispered. "And soon, neither will your cars." The plan was simple, yet devastating. I knew the layout of the county, the tow companies, the impound laws. I knew just how to make their vehicles vanish without a trace. They thought they had power because they had money. But money meant nothing when your car disappeared into the void of bureaucracy. I wasn't going to hurt anyone, but I was going to make damn sure they understood no one takes from a Turner. Not without consequence. The stars above were sharp and clear that night, and for the first time since the fight began, I felt peace. Because I knew exactly what I had to do. And soon, they'd know it too. The morning after I agreed to keep going, the neighborhood smelled like cut grass and fryer oil, the Saturday ritual of yard work and church breakfasts. The blue sign by my gate winked in the sun like a taunt. I walked the road with a thermos of coffee, the mug steaming in my hands, and watched the parade of HOA cars as they filed past. Children waved. A woman with a yoga mat smiled. Normal life hummed along, oblivious to the pressure cooker that had been set beneath it. I moved carefully. The first phase of what I'd started wasn't about drama. It was about leverage. Quiet things. Paper cuts that bleed slowly. I spent the early week at the county courthouse, leaning over stacks of documents and listening to the soft rustle of legal pages. I spoke with clerks in low voices, asked questions that sounded casual but were precise in my head. I learned how the association documented maintenance, what it cost to place a lien, how records get updated. I didn't need to fabricate anything. I simply learned the machinery that crunches the lives of small-town people into forms and numbers. At night, I sat with a folding table in my garage and my laptop, making lists. Names, car makes, license plates, habits. I paid attention to patterns the way a fisherman watches for trout rising. When people left, where they parked, which houses had extra keys lying around, who used the road as a shortcut to the highway. I wrote nothing that I would regret reading in court. My notes were notes of observation, not plans of sabotage. But they were enough to ask the right questions, to prod the system in ways it was vulnerable to being prodded. "You sure about this, Dan?" Mara asked one evening, standing in the doorway with an eyebrow raised and a dish towel in her hand. She'd grown up 2 farms over and had known me since we were both kids with broken bicycles. She'd watched my jaw set the first day the sign went up. and she hadn't left. I said. I'm just making them feel what it is to lose something they take for granted. She folded her arms. Don't get yourself in trouble. I'm not saying don't fight, but pick your tools wisely. I smiled because she sounded like Earl. I don't plan on going to jail. She didn't laugh. The first visible effect wasn't dramatic. It was a letter, formal, stamped, and smelling faintly of basil from the envelope. The HOA announced an upcoming meeting to discuss community access and parking policies. The notice was optimistic, designed to sound as if they were offering a compromise. People came out in droves, retirees with iced teas, young couples with strollers, men in paint-splattered work shirts. They filled the community hall, the fluorescent lights humming above like a swarm of indifferent bees. Greg presided with the same politician's smile, flanked by board members who nodded at intervals as if on cue. I stayed at the back, hands stuffed into my pockets, watching the faces of the people who had been parking on my road. Some looked guilty, some offended, most bewildered. A woman named Denise, who taught at the elementary school, stood up and said, "We all use that road. It's always been part of our route to the park." She spoke as if history were a blanket everyone had slept under. Greg nodded like a master rhetorician. "We're not trying to take from anyone. We just want order. If there are problems, drainage, maintenance, we fix them. It's better for everyone. We didn't ask for rampant use," I said, stepping forward. The murmurs stopped. Half the room turned toward me with the surprised wide eyes of people who realized a storm had been sitting quietly in their neighborhood. "You're here," Greg said, smiling in that way that erases people. "We appreciate your concern, but this is about the greater good." The meeting ended with a polite resolution to form a committee. A lot of smiles. An outcome designed to stall. That night, a truck idled on my road until midnight. The driver smoked a cigarette and watched my porch light like a lighthouse. I didn't confront him. I sat on the steps and listened to the engine tick as it cooled. There was a thickness to the night that felt like a tension, the sense that someone had noticed and was responding. Over the next 2 weeks, small things happened, each one a pinprick in a balloon. I received a citation for parking obstruction on the edge of my property, a silly bureaucratic notice that came with a warning tone. Someone called about a public safety concern to the county, and a code enforcement officer came out to measure the width of my driveway. When he left, he shook his head and told me, "These HOA folks can be persistent." "You okay?" "I am now," I replied. Rumors puffed into the town like steam. I heard neighbors whisper that maybe I'd intimidated people. Others called me a crank who couldn't take change. A woman I'd known since high school crossed the street to avoid me at the grocery store. Each slight hurt, but it did something else too, cemented the spectacle. The more the HOA pushed, the more people noticed the tiny cracks in their civic faith. Then the first real escalation happened, not to me, but to the thing that made them feel safe. Their cars. I won't describe the technique I used. Part of the pleasure of writing this later, if I ever would, is to protect the stupid, to avoid teaching anyone how to hurt others or evade the law. But in the beginning, it was precise, legalistic, and infuriatingly mundane. Their cars didn't explode or vanish in a puff of smoke. They disappeared into the slow machinery of paperwork, waiting rooms, and bureaucratic limbo. A car that couldn't be located rid itself of the immediate comforts of its owner. Letters were generated. Telephone calls were made. People began driving strangely, checking mirrors at stoplights, circling parking lots as if watching for someone to unhook their axles. Denise's minivan went first. She called me at work in a voice I'd never heard before. Quick, breathless, the kind of panic that makes your throat dry. "Daniel," she said, "has anyone seen my van? I left it outside my driveway last night, and it's gone." I closed my eyes and forced calm into my voice. "I haven't seen it, Denise. I'm sorry. You have to help me," she said. "I'm going to be late for work." "The kids." "I'll keep an eye out," I said. "Call the sheriff." She did. They filed a report. The sheriff came by my place the next afternoon with those tired eyes that look like they've seen one too many human disagreements and decided to keep a ledger rather than get involved. He didn't look pleased when I told him what I knew, my role, my observations. "You're walking a tightrope," Dan, he said, sitting on my porch railing. But people who lose things get worse than mad. They get scared. I didn't take it to scare them, I said. I took it to teach them. He didn't answer. He'd got daughters, I knew, and everything about him told me he understood the messy arithmetic of responsibility versus retaliation. As the days went on, the vanishing became a rhythm. Not every car disappeared. Not even most. Just enough to make people second-guess their parking. The HOA's message boards filled with confusion, with frantic, "Has anyone seen?" posts. Greg issued a statement about vandalism and a small element seeking to undermine community trust. He called a press conference, and a local reporter from the county paper showed up with a recorder and a coffee-stained pad. "You'll regret this," Greg said to me in the brief glare we exchanged at the hall. "You think you're above consequences. You're not. You took my road," I said. "You started this." He walked away, his jaw clenched like a vice. The scariest part for me was not the risk of legal fallout. It was watching my neighbors, people I'd grown up with, turn toward fear. They held their children close, locked cars twice, and began to look at me not as a neighbor, but as an author of their anxiety. I didn't want to be that man. If I'd been honest with myself, I'd admit a part of this was ego. I wanted them to listen. I wanted them to feel the absence I felt. But there was also a deeper chord: humiliation. People in positions of petty power thrive until someone shows them how fragile that power is. The trick was to expose it without becoming the monster the town whispered about. That balance cracked on a humid Tuesday when Greg called the sheriff and made accusations, loud, public accusations. He claimed he had evidence tying me to the disappearances. They searched my property. They took a few photos, asked questions that smelled like accusation. The sheriff walked the line between neighbor and lawman. He was careful, and his caution saved me from a night in a cell. But the rumor mill turned faster after that. A social media page popped up with a grainy photo of my porch and the caption, "Mystery Man of Willow Creek." People who'd once left my mail on the stoop now insisted they had nothing to do with me. Mara came by that night, and we sat on the hood of my truck and watched Gregory's house across the street. The ornamental fountain gurgled, oblivious. "You're in deep, Dan," she said. "You can stop." "I can't," I said, because I didn't know the real reason anymore. Part of me was tired and wanted the fight to just end. Part of me needed it to end on terms that reminded the HOA they'd made a mistake. "People are scared," she said. "This isn't pride. This is retaliation. You've got to be ready for the cost." "So are they," I said. "They put that sign up like it was a coronation. They coronated themselves on my land. They should know what it feels like to have something taken." Mara shook her head slowly, her face lit by the streetlight. "You have to make sure you're not just trading one injustice for another." Her words warmed me like a coal. They were truth, simple and difficult at once. I promised myself I'd be careful. The turning point in the rising tide came when a neighbor, Mr. Holden, retired Navy, quiet but exacting, knocked on my gate and asked to come in. He wasn't angry. He was tired. "Dan," he said, in that precise voice that crackled like an old radio, "I lost my truck 2 nights ago. I don't like paranoia, but my wife's a mess." I invited him in. He sat at my kitchen table with a mug, and we spoke for an hour about how small wrongs metastasize. He told me about ships and how discipline on a vessel keeps chaos from swallowing everything. When he stood to leave, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "You think you're doing something noble," he said, "but noble's not always neat. Don't let pride make your hands dirty." I watched him drive away, the same neighborhood he'd served for 30 years, and felt a crunch of regret. For the first time, I imagined a version of this story where I'd backed down after the sign, where I filed paperwork and let some distant judge decide. In that version, the town would go on, the HOA would keep its power, and my road would still be a road, but my name would have been a footnote. Instead, I'd chosen the other path. That night, I sat by the window and watched lights blink out across the cul-de-sacs. I felt like a man with a match, watching a house for something overdue to burn, hoping that the heat would make someone pay attention. Except it wasn't fire I'd started. It was doubt, the quiet, corrosive thing that wears people down and leaves a scar you don't see until the skin tightens. The crescendo was coming. I could feel it like a storm in the air, thick, electric, and inevitable. The next moves would be louder, and consequences would be sharper. I told myself I was ready. I told myself I would stop before anyone got truly hurt. And as I lay awake, the house humming with the late hours of suburban life, I thought of my grandfather digging that first stretch of road with a backhoe and a stubborn belief that land connects people, not possessions. That seed of belief was the only thing I wanted to protect, even if it meant bulldozing through the fragile civility of a small town. The morning the sky split open and rained for the first time in weeks, I felt something like destiny pressing on my chest. It was the kind of rain that came down in sheets, the gullies along my driveway filling with brown water that smelled of iron and old leaves. The neighborhood looked washed, scrubbed of pretense for a few hours, and in that clarity the stakes felt higher than ever. This was the weather of decisions, cold, relentless, honest. Greg didn't wait for sunlight to dry him out. He arrived in a silver truck flanked by 2 board members and a man in a blazer I'd never seen before. The man wore a clipboard like a badge. His name was Carter, and he had the way a man with a law firm teaches you to speak: short sentences, a rehearsed look of concern. Behind them, 3 SUVs packed with residents idled on my road, windshield wipers keeping time with the fall of water. "You can't be serious," I told them, my voice steady although my knuckles tingled. The rain made everything sharp. Faces, words, the bright blue sign standing like a challenge at the entrance. "We can be," Greg said, the smile gone from his face. "We voted Daniel. We're enforcing the community's decision. We'll be placing a temporary barrier to redirect traffic. For safety." "A barrier?" I asked. "On my land." He looked at Carter for confirmation, then back to me with the slow certainty of a man who believes rules are muscles he can flex. "We've contracted crews to put up a gate. It will be temporary while we rotate options. You can discuss this with the association at the hearing next week." "You don't get to temporarily gate my land," I said. "Not without my say-so." Carter clicked his pen, the sound loud in the rain. "Mr. Turner, the association is taking all necessary steps within its authority. Any action you take against the vehicles blocking passage could be construed as interference with our right to maintain community safety." The sheriff hadn't shown. He'd told me the night before he'd be elsewhere. "Another emergency," he said, and his absence made the air taste thin. I could feel neighbors' eyes on me through the rain. The curious, the resentful, the fearful. This was the moment the town might decide my fate by the simple arithmetic of witness and myth. I walked forward, boots squelching in the mud, and stopped 3 feet from Greg. "Pull the trucks back," I said. "You're on my property." He laughed then, a small, brittle thing. "Do it, and I'll move to press charges." "You can't just threaten people, Daniel." "You started this," I said. "You put that sign up. You invited your neighbors to use what's not theirs." "I'm not the one who escalated first." "You escalated when cars began to vanish," Carter said, as if that settled everything into law. Thunder rolled low in the distance, and a gust of wind sent the private road sign spinning on its post. For a breathless second the world felt like a movie set. 2 men, the storm, the rest of the town watching. For a breathless second the truth was all that mattered. Then Denise's voice cut across the rain in a tremor. "My van, my kids' school stuff, is still in there." She stood in the drizzle, spooning a blanket of wet hair away from her face. "You can't do this. Please." Greg hesitated. Someone must have told him something in the silence of his own thoughts, because his hand went to the back pocket of his pants, and he stepped aside like a man whose conscience pricked at him only now. "We just want to keep everyone safe," he said, "and to be fair to the residents." "You're not being fair," I said. "You're being theatrical." "Then do something about it," he snapped. "Prove your claim." That word, prove, echoed in me like a bell. For months, I'd been proving things in small, surgical ways. Records, late-night calls, quiet sabotage that forced people to reconsider parking habits. But now the demand wasn't for evidence of ownership or easement. It was a demand for a kind of moral proof only a public reckoning could bring. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my phone. The battery was low, but the screen lit with a single audio file I'd kept for weeks. One of the many things I'd gathered in the crawl of the conflict. A recording, unaltered and small, of a meeting where Greg had laughed about finding a loophole, a casual admission of things he'd later tried to dress up in legal language. Carter's eyes flicked to the phone as if he could read the title. The rain pounded as I pressed play. At first, it was just the hiss of water in the recording. Then Greg's voice, clearer than I'd expected, came through, comfortable, confident. We'll file whatever looks best. People believe paperwork. It's cheaper than building anything. Laughter. If we can get maintenance agreements in place, we can set the pace. People pay up. We manage the rest. A murmur passed like a wave through the small crowd. Faces shifted. Some flushed with embarrassment, others with a dawning comprehension. Greg's jaw tightened. He looked like a man who'd been caught misplacing an expensive heirloom and suddenly realized it was gone. "You recorded me?" he said, though the recording was proof enough. "That's illegal." "It's legal when it's a public meeting on community affairs," I replied. "And it shows you weren't honest about how you intended to claim the road." Carter moved forward, civil, clipped. "That's hearsay. You can't base action on an out-of-context clip." "You can base action on the county's records, Carter," I said, and everything I'd amassed over the last few weeks, the maps, the deeds, the clerk's notes, felt like a weapon I could finally wield. I had printed copies in my truck. I prepared for a moment like this, though I'd hoped it would be gentler. I walked back to my vehicle, fished out the sheaf of papers, and slapped them on the hood. They were water-dotted but legible. Property maps with my grandfather's name scrawled in faded ink, notations of ownership that predated Willow Creek estates by decades, stamps from the county that proved an absence of recorded easement. I handed a copy to a woman who'd been on the HOA board before, someone with more gray than anger in her face. She read and her hand trembled. "You filed these?" she asked me. "No. The county filed them. I just asked the right questions." For a long minute, there was a quiet that felt like the center of a storm. Then Greg's face went white and the world teetered. He didn't shout. He didn't sue. He looked at the people who'd trusted him and watched their faith blink like lights in the rain. If the recording had revealed his intent, the papers revealed his entitlement had been nothing more than an assumption wrapped in the soothing language of bylaws. "That's not how we remember it," Carter said, but his voice had the small staccato of someone inventing a defense on the fly. People began to talk, softly at first, then louder. Denise's grip on her blanket tightened and then loosened as she breathed. Mr. Holden stood a little straighter, and I could see in his face a man choosing sides. The sheriff pulled into the street then, late, serious, his hat soaked, but his eyes clear, and got out of his cruiser. He had the legal authority the rest of us didn't, and his presence made everything sudden and real. He listened to the recording, took the papers, and asked Greg a few direct questions in a tone that left no room for theater. As he did, calls came into the county, the recorder's office, the assessor, people who'd been anonymous before suddenly dialing numbers with the urgency of citizens who'd realized their trust had been misplaced. I won't pretend the rest happened like a neat unraveling. It was messy, with accusations hurled and denials flung like wet towels. Carter counseled for calm, while Greg's face crumpled in ways I'd never seen. Somewhere in the turmoil, a county inspector drove up with a clipboard of his own and announced, to the small collective shock of the neighborhood, that there were irregularities in documents filed on behalf of the association. "We'll be placing an administrative hold," he said, a bureaucratic gavel that carried more weight than many men in suits. The cars still sat there, sodden and silent, but the air around them changed. People's confidence that the cars would always be theirs evaporated like steam in the rain. The sheriff asked for patience while he and the county sorted out the legalities. Then, in a move that felt both merciful and judicial, he announced that until the investigation concluded, any vehicles improperly registered to the HOA or parked in contested areas would be subject to impound. Greg looked like a man who had practiced shame in private and now found himself performing it in public. He tried to argue, to plead, to smear, but with county officials and a recording and those irrefutable county maps, the narrative shifted. The community's chatter folded into an ugly, embarrassed silence that held more truth than any of Greg's speeches. The impound trucks arrived within the hour, two of them, efficient and bureaucratic. Their drivers moved with an indemnity that had nothing to do with personality and everything to do with procedure. One by one, certain vehicles were hooked and rolled away, Denise's minivan among them. People watched with a complexity of emotions that left their faces raw: shame, relief, anger, a little victory that tasted odd on the tongue. As their cars disappeared down the road, something in the neighborhood's foundation shifted. It was not a clean victory for me. Some neighbors glared like I'd pulled the rug out from under them. Others came to my gate and put their hands on my shoulder. Some didn't speak to me at all, but the sign at my entrance sat crooked in the mud, its posture diminished by truth and rain. I felt hollow and triumphant, a bizarre amalgam. I had not sought to ruin anyone. I had wanted respect for a piece of ground that had been my family's for generations. But the climb to that respect had been steep and slippery, and people had fallen on the way. As the last tow truck rolled away, its hydraulics clanking, I heard a child ask his mother what was happening, and her voice, soft, patient, explained that sometimes grown-ups fought about things until the law settled it. The sheriff stayed long into the afternoon, taking statements and promising a careful investigation. Greg left in a borrowed sedan, his ego as damp and wrinkled as his suit. Carter remained, cool and silent, the relic of a system that can both solve and obscure. When the rain finally let up and the sun broke through in a flat, white glare, a few neighbors lingered at my gate. Denise stood there, hat in hand, and for a moment none of us moved. Then she walked up the gravel and stopped a few feet away. "You didn't have to do it like that," she said. "I know," I admitted, "but I couldn't see another way that made them listen." She looked at me, not with the full forgiveness I wanted, but with something like understanding. "Make sure you can live with what you've done," she said. I did not answer. I only watched as the last of the impound trucks turned onto the highway and vanished over the rise. The space where their cars had been felt both empty and full, empty of possessions, full of lessons that would take longer to sink into the town's bones. Some victories leave you standing in the rubble, holding proof in your hands while the cost of winning unfolds around you. I had won what I set out to protect: the road, or at least the notion that it could not be stolen without consequence. But victory had teeth. It bit. The next moves, court dates, investigations, whispered side glances at PDA meetings, were on the horizon. I sat on the porch that night, rain-slick gravel cooling under my boots, and for the first time since the sign went up, I allowed myself to wonder which of us had been changed more by the fight: the people who thought they could take, or the man who made them pay attention. The sun rose over Sycamore Ridge with an almost surreal softness, as if the world itself had taken a long, cleansing breath after a storm. For the first time in months, Daniel awoke without the weight of war pressing down on his chest. He sat on his porch steps with a mug of black coffee, watching the sky turn shades of amber and pink. The silence wasn't tense anymore. It was peaceful, dotted only by birdsong and the distant hum of morning sprinklers. Across the road, the cul-de-sac looked bare, still stripped of the HOA's once proud collection of SUVs and sedans. Their absence was a monument in itself, a reminder of the battle Daniel had fought and won. Emily padded out onto the porch, rubbing her eyes, her hair a mess of dark tangles. "Morning, Dad," she mumbled, collapsing onto the step beside him. He smiled faintly. "Morning, kiddo. Sleep okay?" She nodded, hugging her knees. It was quiet. "I like it." Daniel leaned back against the porch post, sipping his coffee. "Yeah, quiet's not bad, is it?" The past few weeks had been a blur: court hearings, settlement papers, media calls. The HOA had fractured like brittle glass under the pressure. Marjorie, once the iron-fisted queen of Sycamore Ridge, had resigned in disgrace after being dragged through depositions that revealed her misuse of HOA funds. Charles had disappeared almost overnight, moving out in the middle of the night with a rental truck, leaving behind a house with foreclosure notices taped to the door. The neighborhood wasn't the same. Some people avoided Daniel, eyes down, their guilt and cowardice plain. Others waved, sheepishly grateful for what he'd done but too afraid to have stood beside him during the fight. But Daniel didn't care anymore. He hadn't fought this war for applause or neighborly handshakes. He fought it for Emily, for the road his grandfather had built with his own calloused hands, for the promise that no board of paper pushers could steal what was rightfully his. "Hey, Dad." Emily's voice broke his thoughts. "Are we safe now?" Daniel set his coffee aside, turning to face her fully. Her eyes were wide, searching for something more than a simple yes. Safe. He thought about the word, about how fragile it really was. Then he nodded. "Yeah, we're safe. Nobody's gonna take what's ours ever again." Her lips curved into a small, relieved smile, and she leaned her head on his shoulder. For Daniel, that was enough. Later that week, he was out by the property marker, the one the HOA had ripped out months ago and tried to erase from existence. Now, a brand new oak post stood firm in its place, with a brass plaque engraved with the name. Whitmore Road, established 1952. His grandfather's name, his family's legacy. The marker gleamed in the sunlight, and for the first time, Daniel didn't feel the rage that had fueled him for so long. He just felt pride. "Looks good there," a voice called. Daniel turned to see Mrs. Callahan, his elderly neighbor, standing on the sidewalk with her little dog. She gave him a gentle smile. "Your grandfather would be proud." Daniel's throat tightened unexpectedly. "Yeah," he managed. "I think so too." She patted his arm as she passed. Not everyone had the guts to stand up to them. You did what needed doing. Daniel watched her go, her words sinking deeper than he expected. That evening, as twilight settled, Daniel drove into town with Emily. They stopped at the small diner they used to visit on Friday nights before the HOA drama consumed their lives. The waitress, a cheerful woman with gray streaks in her ponytail, grinned when she saw them. "Been a while since I saw you two." "Same order." Daniel chuckled. "Yeah, burgers and fries for both of us." Emily beamed, swinging her legs under the booth like she was 10 years younger. For once, she looked like a teenager again, not a kid forced to carry the weight of her dad's battles. As they ate, Daniel felt the tension unraveling in him, strand by strand. Maybe this was what victory looked like, not a grand parade or headlines, but a quiet night with his daughter, greasy food, and laughter. When they left, the town was alive with Friday night chatter. Nobody cared about HOA feuds here. Nobody cared about board members or bylaws. Life went on, simple and untainted. Daniel realized something important then. He didn't need to carry the fight any longer. The war was over. He had won. Weeks later, Daniel walked through the cul-de-sac again, this time with a toolbox in hand. The HOA's no parking signs still stood, rusted and useless, silent relics of a dictatorship that no longer existed. He stopped at one, gripped his wrench, and began unbolting it. The metal groaned as it came loose, and when it finally toppled to the ground, Daniel felt an almost cathartic release. One by one, he pulled the signs down, tossing them into a pile. Emily helped, laughing every time one hit the grass with a clang. "Feels good, huh?" he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "The best," she agreed. When the last sign came down, Daniel looked around at the cul-de-sac. For the first time, it felt like home again, not a battleground. Emily nudged him. "So what are you going to do with all these?" He smirked, thinking of making a bonfire. She laughed, the sound bright and unburdened, and Daniel decided that was exactly what he'd do. Burn every last remnant of their control, let the smoke carry it away into the night sky. The bonfire blazed high behind their house that weekend. A few neighbors gathered, hesitant at first, then more openly as the flames licked upward. People who had once whispered from behind blinds now stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the signs melt into nothing. One man raised a beer. "To Daniel, who reminded us that this is our neighborhood, not theirs." A cheer went up, and though Daniel didn't usually like the spotlight, he let it wash over him. Not for his ego, but because Emily deserved to see her father honored for what he'd done. She squeezed his hand. "Told you you'd win," she whispered. Daniel looked down at her, the firelight dancing in her eyes. "Guess you were right." As the flames crackled, the weight finally lifted off his shoulders completely. The HOA was gone. The road was his. And for the first time in a long, long while, the future felt wide open. That night, long after the last ember faded and the neighbors had gone home, Daniel sat on the porch again, the air cool and sweet around him. Emily had gone to bed, and the house was quiet. He thought of his grandfather, of the road carved through dirt and rock by sheer grit. He thought of the months of fear, anger, and exhaustion. And he thought of the ending, the way he had turned their arrogance into ash. Daniel smiled faintly to himself. The HOA had claimed his road, but in the end, he had claimed his freedom. And that, he realized, was the greatest victory of all. If you enjoyed this intense story, smash that like button and subscribe for more gripping, cinematic tales. Don't forget to hit the bell so you never miss the next thriller. Your support keeps these stories coming.